In 2021, one of the most powerful women in entertainment was brought to the brink on live television. Not by scandal or betrayal, but by a conversation that spiraled out of control in front of millions. She had survived a father who stole from her, a husband who once tried to kill her in a blackout, a cancer diagnosis at the height of her success, and an industry that discards women the moment they become inconvenient. Yet what nearly broke her was something both smaller and larger. At the same time, to understand who Sharon Osbourne really is, you have to go back to the beginning. Sharon Rachel Levy was born on October 9, 1952, in Brixton, South London, the daughter of the feared and formidable music manager Don Arden. He managed acts like Little Richard, Small Faces, and Electric Light Orchestra, and he ruled both his business and his household with intimidation. Rage was the climate of her childhood. Love felt conditional. Sharon grew up learning that power was the only real currency and that survival required reading the room before the storm hit. She left school at 16 and began working for her father, absorbing the mechanics of the music industry. How deals were struck, how loyalty was discarded, how fear could be used as leverage. At 19, she met Ozzy Osbourne, the former frontman of Black Sabbath, who had been fired from the band and was spiraling in addiction. Where others saw chaos, she saw talent worth saving. She began managing him, first quietly, then with full commitment. Their relationship became both romantic and professional, deeply entangled from the start. They married in 1982 and built a life that was anything but stable. As his addictions intensified, there were relapses, rehabilitation, broken promises. One terrifying night in 1989, when in a blackout, he attacked her and was charged with attempted murder. Sharon chose not to press charges. She believed she understood the difference between the man and the disease. It was a choice that cost her. But she stayed and continued building his career. She turned his solo work into a global force, launching albums and eventually creating Ozfest, a touring festival that proved she was far more than a manager in the shadows. While raising their children, Kelly, Jack, and Amishi negotiated contracts, fought promoters, and carved out her own authority in an industry that rarely credited women for their power. Eventually, she confronted the deepest betrayal of her life, discovering that her father had siphoned money from Ozzy's earnings. She sued him. It was not just a legal battle, but a severing of family. She won the case but lost her father for decades, reconciling only partially before his death. In 2007, in 2002, at 50, Sharon was diagnosed with colon cancer. Just as the family's reality show, The Osbournes, became a cultural phenomenon. Instead of turning off the cameras, she chose to keep filming. Viewers watched her tell her children. They watched her endure chemotherapy and surgery. She survived and later chose a preventive double mastectomy to reduce future risk. The show made her a household name, transforming her from industry insider to public figure. She then joined the X Factor, where her fierce loyalty to contestants and fiery exchanges with Simon Cowell made her compelling television. Later, she became a longtime co-host on The Talk, where she spent over a decade as a daily presence in American homes. Sharp, unfiltered, and unapologetically direct, she felt both relatable and formidable. Then in March 2021, everything unraveled. During a heated on-air discussion about her defense of Piers Morgan following his comments about Meghan Markle, Sharon became emotional and defensive. The exchange with co-host Sheryl Underwood escalated, and the fallout was swift. Investigations followed. Apologies were issued. Ultimately, she left The Talk after 11 years. Now, the final moments overshadowed a decade of work. For the first time in her career, she could not fully control the narrative, as Ozzy's health declined. Following a fall in 2019 and a subsequent Parkinson's diagnosis announced on Good Morning America in 2020, Sharon stepped into the role of primary caregiver. The disease moved slowly and relentlessly. There was no contract to renegotiate, no opponent to outmaneuver, only daily adjustments and quiet endurance. In 2021, they left Los Angeles and returned to England, taking distance from the noise. In her 70s, Sharon has spoken candidly about cosmetic surgeries she feels went too far. She lives in the English countryside with Ozzy, navigating his illness while maintaining her sharp wit and presence. Her relationships with her children have matured into something steadier. She speaks now with more softness about grandchildren and about time. Her legacy is layered. She is the daughter who broke from her father's shadow and became formidable. In her own right, the wife who stayed when leaving would have been easier. The manager who rebuilt a fallen rock star into a global brand, the television personality who made honesty feel like spectacle, the public figure who was shamed and did not disappear. She is also flawed, capable of sharpness that sometimes wounds. Both truths coexist. Sharon Osbourne understood from childhood that power is not given. It is taken, held, lost, and rebuilt. She has done all of those things more than once. What remains now is smaller, but more enduring than fame. A husband still here, children who call, grandchildren who will one day form their own opinions. Battles, betrayals, triumphs, and mistakes belong to history. What remains is a woman who is never small, never quiet, never willing to be anything other than entirely herself. Time is a way of stripping away the noise and leaving only what truly matters. As for Sharon Osbourne, the later years have not been about reclaiming dominance or rewriting headlines. They have been about endurance in a quieter form. The pace that once defined her life tour schedules, production meetings, live broadcasts, constant negotiation has slowed not by surrender but by necessity. Caring for Ozzy has reshaped her days. Parkinson's does not move dramatically. It moves persistently. It demands patience, structure, vigilance. Sharon, who once thrived in chaos, has had to master stillness. There is something profoundly different about fighting an industry versus sitting beside someone you love as their body changes in ways neither of you can control. In her earlier life, problems could be attacked, contracts could be renegotiated, public narratives could be redirected. Illness offers no such leverage. It requires acceptance without passivity, strength without spectacle. Sharon has spoken about the emotional complexity of being both partner and caregiver. The tension between protecting Ozzy's dignity and acknowledging the reality of his condition, between staying strong for him and allowing herself to feel the weight of what is happening. The move back to England created physical distance from Hollywood, but it also symbolized something deeper. Los Angeles had been the stage for their most public victories and humiliations. England, particularly the countryside, offered something less performative. The environment is quieter, the expectations are lower, the mythology does not press as hard against the walls. In that space, Sharon has had room to reflect on a life lived almost entirely in forward motion. Reflection, however, does not mean regret dominates the landscape. She has never been someone who dwells publicly in apology. Instead, she analyzes. She admits when she believes she went to far whether in cosmetic procedures or in moments of televised confrontation, but she does not collapse under those admissions. There is a difference between accountability and self-erasure, and Sharon has always refused the latter. Even in controversy, she has maintained that intent matters, that complexity matters, that human beings are not reducible to their worst televised moment. Her children, now fully adults, represent perhaps the most complicated success of her life. Raising them inside an environment that was both loving and chaotic left marks, as all childhoods do, yet the bonds have endured. Lee's openness mirrors her mother's willingness to speak before calculating. Jack's steadiness carries a resilience shaped by watching both parents survive storms. Amy's decision to step outside the reality television spotlight demonstrated a boundary Sharon ultimately respected. Even if it was painful at the time, respect learned rather than instinctive may be one of her most significant evolutions. Becoming a grandmother has softened edges that once seemed permanent. It has introduced a perspective that is not rooted in conquest or defense but in continuity. The woman who grew up fighting for relevance in her father's shadow now watches a new generation that knows her. Not as a manager, not as a television personality, not as a controversial figure, but simply as family. That shift carries a quiet power she did not experience in her own childhood. Professionally, she remains watchable because she remains unfiltered. The sharpness is still there. The humor still lands. What has changed is the urgency. There is less to prove. The hunger that once drove her to outmaneuver every opponent has been replaced by something steadier. She no longer needs to dominate the room to feel secure in it. confidence earned through decades of survival is less explosive and more grounded. Looking back across 5 decades, the arc of her life resists a clean moral. It is not a story of pure triumph, nor is it one of caution. It is a study in willpower, how far it can take a person, and what it costs along the way. Sharon Osbourne built careers, fought legal battles, survived illness, endured public fallout, and stood beside a man whose life repeatedly teetered on the edge. She made decisions that saved people and decisions that hurt people. She loved fiercely. She fought fiercely. If there is a through line in her story, it is refusal. Refusal to disappear when dismissed. Refusal to abandon when things became ugly. Refusal to shrink to make others comfortable. That refusal defined her at 19 when she chose to manage a man others had written off. It defined her when she sued her father. It defined her when she kept cameras rolling through cancer. And it defined her when she did not retreat quietly after public criticism. Now, in her 70s, the refusal looks different. It is quieter, but no less firm. 'Tis the refusal to let illness dictate the emotional temperature of her home. The refusal to let one controversy define a lifetime of work. The refusal to see herself only through the lens of public approval. What remains is not the spectacle, but the substance, loyalty, resilience, and a stubborn insistence on being fully, unapologetically herself. History will likely debate her impact, dissect her missteps, and analyze her influence on both music and television, but history cannot capture the private hours, the hospital rooms, the late-night negotiations, the moments of doubt she rarely allowed to surface. Those belong to her. And perhaps that is the final truth of Sharon Osbourne's story, that beneath the armor, beneath the headlines, beneath the sharp commentary and louder controversies, there has always been a woman shaped by survival, determined not to be erased, and unwilling to let the world decide her ending for her. A life like hers does not conclude with a dramatic final act. It settles. It reshapes itself around what remains. Sharon Osbourne's case. What remains is not the noise, but the core of the habits of strength, the instinct to protect, the refusal to be sidelined by age or opinion. The spotlight that once felt relentless now flickers more gently, and she steps into it on her own terms. There is something almost poetic about the trajectory. She began as a girl in South London, learning to survive a powerful man's temper. She became a woman powerful enough to challenge him. She built a career resurrecting a rock star the world had dismissed. She turned her family into a cultural phenomenon, which fought cancer publicly. She clashed on live television and absorbed the consequences in full view of the world. Each chapter could have ended her relevance. None of them did. In quieter interviews now, there is a different cadence to her voice. The fire is still there, but it burns lower, steadier. She speaks about aging without pretending it is graceful. She speaks about loss without dramatizing it. Yes. She acknowledges that strength can become armor so thick it isolates the person wearing it. And she hints occasionally that learning to soften without collapsing has been the hardest lesson of all. Ozzy's ongoing health challenges continue to shape their days. There are good mornings and difficult ones. There are flashes of the old irreverence, the humor that first bound them together, and there are reminders that time moves in only one direction. Darren's role has evolved from architect of an empire to guardian of memory and stability. It is less glamorous, it is more intimate. It may also be the most meaningful work she has ever done. Public opinion remains divided, as it always has been with her. Some see resilience, others see ruthlessness. Some admire her loyalty, others question her choices. Sharon has lived long, enough to understand that neither version tells the full story. Reputation shifts with cultural winds. Character, for better or worse, is slower to change. She has accepted that she will never be universally approved, and she no longer seems interested in trying. What becomes clear in the later chapters is that survival was never her only goal. Survival was the foundation, which she built on top of it. Love, family, influence, controversy, reinvention was the real work. And while the world may remember the headlines, the arguments, the ratings, the scandals, those are only fragments and private moments, away from cameras and commentary. There is simply a woman who endured more than most and refused to disappear. A woman who learned early that security is fragile and therefore fought to create it wherever she could. A woman who made mistakes loudly and loved just as loudly. A woman who never learned how to be small. The future at this stage is less about expansion and more about preservation of health, of connection, of dignity. Sharon Osbourne does not need another empire. She has already built one. What she protects now is smaller, but infinitely more valuable. The people around her, the peace she has carved out, and the version of herself that no longer needs to prove. She belongs in the room. When the story is finally told in full, it will not be simple. It will not be tidy. It will not be universally flattering. That it will be unmistakably hers. And that, more than power or fame or redemption, may be the most honest measure of a life fully lived, and perhaps that is the final evolution, not reinvention. It's not redemption, but integration. For most of her life, Sharon Osbourne existed in extremes, crisis or triumph, loyalty or betrayal, strength or collapse. The middle ground was rarely available to her. It wasn't how she was raised, and it wasn't how the industries she conquered operated. Everything was urgent. Everything was high stakes. Everything demanded force. Now there is space between those extremes. In that space, she has had to confront something unfamiliar, who she is when she is not fighting. There is no contract to negotiate, no public battle to win, no crisis. Demanding immediate control. For someone wired to anticipate disaster, calm can feel disorienting. Yet this quieter chapter has required a different kind of courage, the courage to sit still with memory. Memory, for her, is layered. The volatile brilliance of her father. The early days with Ozzy, when success felt fragile and disaster was always one relapse away. The terror of illness. The euphoria of unexpected television fame. The humiliation of public controversy. Each memory contains both pride and pain. Age has not erased either. It has simply made them coexist more peacefully. There is also the awareness of legacy. Not the public version shaped by headlines, but the personal one. What will her grandchildren understand about her? Will they see the headlines first, or the resilience? Will they hear about the arguments, or the loyalty? Sharon cannot control that narrative anymore, and that, perhaps, is the most radical shift of all. A woman who built a career on managing perception has had to accept that eventually perception belongs to others, yet, even in surrendering control of the narrative, she retains authorship of herself. She speaks openly about vanity, about insecurity, about pushing cosmetic enhancement too far in pursuit of an image that felt necessary at the time. She does not hide from those admissions. There is something disarming in watching a woman who once embodied control admit miscalculation without dissolving into shame. Her marriage, against all early predictions, remains intact. It is no longer the volatile partnership of youth. It is something weathered, scarred, and deeply bonded. They have seen each other at their worst addiction, rage, illness, vulnerability, and remained. That endurance does not romanticize the pain they caused each other. It simply acknowledges that love, in their case, was not fragile. It was battered and still standing. If there is regret, it seems less about professional battles and more about time. Time spent in motion, time spent reacting, a time that might have been softer if circumstances had been different. Regret is not the dominant tone. There is, instead, a clear-eyed understanding that she did what she knew how to do with the tools she had, and those tools were forged in a difficult childhood, sharpened in a ruthless industry. The world will continue to debate her. It will replay the clips, it will revisit the controversies. That is the nature of public life. But in the English countryside, far from studio lights, those debates grow quieter. What remains immediate are ordinary things. Shared meals, medical appointments, family visits, the rhythm of days that are no longer defined by ratings. For a woman who once thrived on spectacle, there is something almost profound in that ordinariness. She is not chasing relevance. She's not engineering a comeback narrative. She appears, speaks, participates, but without the hunger that once drove every move. That hunger built an empire. This calm protects what's left of it. In the end, Sharon Osbourne's life is not a cautionary tale or a fairy tale. It is a testament to durability, to the complicated strength required to love flawed people, to the cost of ambition, to the reality that survival does not guarantee peace, but it does make peace possible. She began as a girl learning how to withstand a storm. She became a woman who could command one. And now, in the later light of her life, she is someone learning how to live without needing either, not smaller, quieter in spirit, just steadier, and perhaps finally at rest.